Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting Australian Indian Radio and Brisbane Indian Times daily Facebook live update. And hey, it's Friday. Welcome to Friday, 11th of September. Well, today, a family of a father with cancer in Queensland will be allowed to visit him after a U-turn by death bosses, but they'll have to go to hotel quarantine. And Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk has accused the Prime Minister of bullying after his phone call pleading for a Canberra woman to be allowed out of quarantine to attend her father's funeral. She was not allowed to go to the service but visited his body in PPE. Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews is standing firm on Melbourne's curfew, and a Sydney hospital outbreak has grown. Well, you should follow our live stream for news from Australia and around the world daily. Well, in the show today, we have Canberra women refused permission to leave Brisbane quarantine for dad's funeral, and a family can now visit dying dad in Queensland after a U-turn by state. And Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk accuses Prime Minister of bullying. And of course, we have the new alerts for Sydney Hospital. But first, let's take a look at what our weekend's going to be looking like and what the weather is doing currently. With that, let's welcome Dilraj.
Good morning, everyone. Maximum temperature for today will be 22. Brisbane area is mostly cloudy and there are 60% chances of rain. Wind southeasterly 25 to 35 km per hour. Fire danger is low to moderate. Sun protection is recommended till 2:40 p.m. UV index is predicted to reach 7, that is high. So tomorrow, that is Saturday, minimum will be 14 and maximum will be 20. Brisbane area will be mostly cloudy with 30% chances of rain. Wind southeasterly 15 to 25 km per hour, becoming light in the evening. Sun protection again is recommended till 2:40 p.m. and UV index is predicted to reach 7, that is high. And on Sunday, minimum will be 14 and maximum will be 24. Brisbane area will be partly cloudy with 10% chances of rain. Light winds becoming easterly 15 to 20 km per hour during the afternoon, then becoming light during the day. Sun protection again is recommended till 2:40 p.m. and UV index is predicted to reach 7, that is high. So enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Wonderful. The weekend's going to be looking great. Well, right now, as we know, that Queensland has completed 1 million tests. So well done, Queensland. Well, right now, let's go and hear from our Premier.
Good morning, everyone. Well, as I mentioned in the hearing this morning, that there are 2 new cases today, but both of them are in quarantine, so we're very comfortable with that. So once again, it's a very good day for Queensland. There are 28 active cases and the total confirmed cases is 1,145, and in the last 24 hours we've had 9,216 tests. So once again, thank you Queenslanders for going out and getting tested. I'll hand over to the Deputy Premier and then to our Deputy Chief Health Officer, and then we're more than happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Premier. Those 2 new cases bring our number of active cases currently to 28, our total number in the pandemic so far to 1,145. Both of them were in quarantine and were known to be direct contacts of already confirmed cases. One of them, the 7th member of a household, all who now have had COVID-19 but who were in quarantine, and the other a confirmed community contact of a case. I want to make special mention today of Richard. Richard is our longest, is our COVID patient in hospital the longest. He spent 77 days in intensive care, and next week will move into a rehabilitation bed where he will be taken care of. He's 81. He came off the Ruby Princess. He's had COVID since March, and he knows better than anyone just how awful this disease can be, how great our hospital services are at saving lives from COVID, but also how long it can take to recover. I wanted to mention briefly that further sewage testing in the Elie Beach region has come back as negative. That does not mean that first test result was wrong. The first test result was right, but subsequent test results are negative, and we'll continue to test sewage there in conjunction with UQ and right around the state. And Dr. Sonia Bennett is here with us today. She is the Deputy Chief Health Officer. Dr. Jeanette Young has a well-earned weekend off, but I'm sure any medical-related questions Dr. Bennett is well placed to take.
Thank you, Premier and Deputy Premier. I won't repeat the numbers this morning that the Premier and Deputy Premier have just announced. Just suffice to say that it is very good news. I think the longer we go where we are picking up cases who are in quarantine, and if they hadn't been traced may have been infectious in the community, is a good sign, and I think a sign that that we can quickly get this outbreak under control if that continues every day that happens. We still have active cases, as the Deputy Premier said, and so most of those people are reasonably well, but we continue to monitor their health and hope they stay that way. One of the recent cases was an older gentleman, and as you know, the older community is particularly vulnerable to severe disease, and a reason why we can't get complacent about the pandemic and need to continue to monitor, both do our job in health and ask the community to do their role as well. So thank you.
So Dr. Bennett, yesterday Dr. Young said that they suspected clusters would have come from the
So there's no firm link. The reason that Dr. Young and many of us think there's a link is because prior to this recent cluster, they were our most recent cases in community, and we haven't seen any other community transmission or any other importations, and so it just makes epidemiological sense that that link is there around those cases.
And Dr. Bennett, sorry, just to clarify, the new cases, are they linked to the Ipswich Hospital?
They are linked to the cluster more broadly. So one of the cases is linked to the Ipswich Hospital, but as you know, as we get generations on, it was actually a case, a community contact of a case, so not a hospital contact if you like, but certainly linked to the hospital cluster. The other one is linked to one of the correctional facilities clusters and has occurred in a household.
How long have they been?
They've been in for some time, so long enough that by the time they did get onset of symptoms, so they were identified as potentially being exposed, put into quarantine, were not symptomatic at the time, developed symptoms in quarantine, were tested and positive, and that's exactly what we like to see. I can't tell you the exact number of days, but it's probably about a week.
What do you say community?
Social contacts or community contacts? Can you give an idea of how much exposure they had to
So it varies. You know, if you're talking about the two recent cases, they're very different. One's a household contact. We know that COVID can transmit very quickly in households. It's a very infectious disease, a part of the reason we have to remain vigilant. The other contact, I don't have the details, but it's not a household contact, it's more of a social type contact. There doesn't have to be a lot of social interaction for transmission. It does vary, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the guidelines that we use, which is 15 minutes face-to-face contact or 2 hours in an enclosed, sharing the same enclosed space. But we certainly see transmission outside of that as well, which is why we sort of extend the scope very broad when assessing contacts.
And Dr. I understand that exemptions have been granted for Mark King's family to come up from New South Wales to say they goodbye. Is that right? And is it the whole family, the 4 children and the father and the brother?
So my understanding is that there's very active discussion with both the family and Mark Keynes, and that's ongoing. Certainly trying to find, a solution that will support both Mark and his family in moving forward. I'd just like to say I think we all recognise that these are difficult situations, every one of us, and there are reasons the restrictions are in place, and I think we've all seen the good outcome of that. But in every situation with Mark Keynes and others, the department works closely with both applying for exemptions and the patient to try to find a solution to support what they would like, but at the same time recognising that we need to continue to mitigate any risk of transmission.
What would you say to people who are saying at the moment that it seems that the only way that people are getting movement on exemptions is if they raise it to the
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that's correct. I think there's many more cases, similar stories which are heartbreaking that the department is dealing with and the Chief Health Officer. I think clearly the ones raised in the media are high profile. I don't accept that the outcome's any different in those cases. I think they're just more high profile.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we leave that press conference there, and it is, as we know, the battle of the borders, as we reported yesterday, and there's still a lot that's happening. But right now, Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk told Parliament she refused to be bullied by Prime Minister Scott Morrison after he personally called her to allow a woman to attend the funeral. Let's go to that news and let's go to Queensland Parliament.
I called the Leader of the Opposition for her first question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my first question is to the Premier. I refer to Sarah's tragic case as being reported this morning. Sarah applied for an exemption so she could get back to Brisbane to say goodbye, but by the time it was granted, her father had passed. Sarah has been told she can't leave quarantine to go to his funeral at 2 p.m. today because her border pass was given to see her dad in hospital, but not to go to a funeral. Will the Premier now show some compassion and allow Sarah to say goodbye to her dad?
I call the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. Mr Speaker, we are in extraordinary times at the moment, and no one likes the fact that we're in a global pandemic, and no one likes to hear these tragic personal stories, Mr Speaker. I don't like to hear it, you don't like to hear it, Leader of the Opposition, no one in this House likes to hear it, the public don't like to hear it, and tragically, families have been prevented from going and seeing their loved ones right across the country. This is not unique to Queensland. But let me say this very clearly, Mr Speaker. I do not make these individual decisions. They are made by the Chief Health Officer. I'm very disappointed that the Leader of the Opposition would come in here and ask a very personal and sensitive issue when the Leader of the Opposition knows that it is not my decision. And secondly, while I'm on my feet, Mr Speaker, let me say this very clearly. Let me say this very clearly.
Member for Neckland will cease his interjections. Premier has the call.
I will not be bullied, nor will I be intimidated.
Order.
By the Prime Minister of this country. who contacted me this morning and who I made very clear to the
Member
fact
Everton will put his
that
comments
it
through
was
the
not my
chair.
decision, that I would pass the information on to the Chief Health Officer, and it is the Chief Health Officer's decision to make. Mr Speaker.
Member for
Mr.
Nicklin is
Speaker,
warned under standing
the
orders.
Prime Minister at the time said to me that he had not gone public. But, Mr Speaker, I knew that he would go public, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I knew that he would go public, Mr Speaker. This is a very distressing time. And my question to the Leader of the Opposition is, did anyone from the Prime Minister's office contact the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker? Because we know everything's coordinated these days.
And there we go. As she said, that she would not be intimidated and that she does not make those decisions just by herself, that it's the whole of the cabinet and, of course, working very closely with the health authorities there. And as you know, many times people are commenting that a lot of these things are driven by the upcoming elections as well. Well, I leave that up to you to decide. But right now, let's go to this news, which is a good news, and the story that we have been following of the two boat guys who were missing off the South Australian coast for 4 days. And when they made contact, not with the police, but first they made contact with someone within their family, and they were found, and they were found to be safe and well. So Derek Robinson says he was very emotional after being reunited with his family. It's a good story. Emotional scenes there.
Emotional, very much emotional. I knew I'd see him again, but I just didn't know when. Yeah, I'm glad to be back, and I'm on sturdy ground here, but it just feels like my legs are wobbling all over the place.
Did you know what was happening with the search? That everyone
I had no idea until this morning, and yeah, and then it all just. We just realised everyone's looking for us, and yeah.
Were you in trouble at all out there?
It was just rough. It was rocky. I don't think I felt scared. I felt just isolated. It felt like the world didn't exist because we were out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know. I don't know what to say. Hey, I don't.
Were you actually lost? Did you not...
No, we knew where we were. But it was just the tides, the currents, threw us off a bit, and yeah, I don't know what else to say.
So it's wonderful to see that he's reunited with his family, and that's a good story, as I mentioned, on this Friday leading into the weekend, with a little bit of good news there. Anytime people get reunited with their families after being lost at the sea, I think that's a good story. Well, next up, we look at Cathy Freeman as she reflects on her legacy and life after sports. Who can ever forget that moment, which was 20 years since Cathy Freeman carried the hopes of the nation at the Sydney Olympics? Now, a new documentary explains and explores the moment that has happened since. So, we won't have time to go through the full here, but here's the glimpses of her story.
Cathy, welcome to News Breakfast. Great to see you. I just want to ask you whether you're ready for this big anniversary, 20 years after Sydney Olympics.
I don't think I have
And it
much
is hard to
choice
believe it's
in the
20
matter.
years.
But I think I'm as ready as I could ever possibly be, Paul.
Well, the documentary, Freeman, you've really spoken about this big race more and in more depth than I've heard you before. Why have you done it this way?
Oh, I just thought it was about time, that I just shared as much of the whole story and as much as the experience as what I could have humanly possibly have done. Why now? Just a couple of things, really. I think it was just more of a feeling. It just felt right especially, when you're a parent, you kind of have children who kind of need to understand who their parents are, and also the fact that I think it's a lovely story. I think it's a really happy, uplifting film.
And does your daughter not quite understand what this time and place was like for everyone?
I think, right as we speak, she's a little bit confused because she goes, in reaction to seeing the Freeman ad on this morning on telly, she said, "Mum, why are you doing this film? I thought you were a private person." So I think in her mind she's a little bit conflicted, but I think I did the best in answering her question in that I said, look, you need to understand who I am as a mother or as a woman, as a person. It's in a way it's a little bit of an introduction into the athlete I once was.
And I believe you haven't seen it. Are you waiting to watch it together as a family?
Absolutely. I think we'll have a fun time watching it. I think there'll be a lot of laughs, I've no doubt.
And you know how it finishes, so that's okay as well. Hey, was everything there in the memory? You mentioned in the film that it still feels like a dream, but your memory seems really sharp on every almost sensory detail that you could have.
Yeah, that was the whole idea, Paul. I mean, I really wanted to take those who are in the audience, or those who are watching, or those who are listening to. I really wanted to share as much as I could, because it's such a memorable experience. Well, for me, absolutely, and I hope it is for others as well. I really am a kind of a person who is all or nothing.
Too good! The crowd roaring! Freeman wins gold! Kathy's the winner!
Is there anything that shocks you when you look?
And those are some amazing moments. If you get a chance, please do, view that full documentary. It is amazing, and it is inspirational. And she's such a brand ambassador for the indigenous people here. She's doing just wonderfully well. But it's hard, when I got the news first up, and it said 20 years, I said, wow, it is actually 20 years. It's very hard to believe. Time does fly. Well, right now, let's go to New South Wales and the making news this morning. And you've all probably heard about the koala policy. And Joe Barilaro says that Nationals were betrayed on New South Wales government's koala policy. So what actually happened there? So New South Wales government is in turmoil after Deputy Premier and Nationals leader John Barilaro said his party would no longer support government's legislation in Parliament in the latest explosive developments in a coalition spat about koala policy. Mr. Barilaro announced all National MPs would move to the crossbench. He held his press conference in Sydney yesterday. So, let's hear from him and get his point of view.
Effectively, it's put all members on the crossbench in a roundabout way. All members united in the National Party on the crossbench, in a way that we will not be supporting government bills. But we're not just going to surrender our cabinet positions, our ability to fight for regional rule in New South Wales, because I know there are Liberal members that would love to see that. They'd love to see me resign today. They would like to see members resign today. But that would be actually giving in. We're going to sit back and fight. But in the meantime, we will use our ability in Parliament and the parliamentary process to actually get our message across. So effectively, by not voting or abstaining on voting on government bills, we're effectively on the crossbench. We are not the coalition today. We are the National Party, and we're sending a clear message as the National Party. We are today clearly identifying ourselves as an independent party that has the ability to make decisions that are important, and we'll now have to fight this through the coalition arrangement.
And he made it very clear there that he's not speaking on behalf of the coalition, but he's speaking on behalf of the National Party there. Very, very strong views there as well. But he's got a point there as well. Well, right now, let's go for a very quick commercial break. We'll be right back after the break.
ग्लोबनेट रियलिटी 1989 से लेकर अब तक का विश्वसनीय और माननीय ब्रिस्बेन का रियल एस्टेट एजेंट है। उषा चंद्रा, जो कि ग्लोबनेट की डायरेक्टर है, अपने ग्राहकों को ईमानदार और एथिक सर्विसेज देती हैं। अगर आप ब्रिस्बेन की प्रॉपर्टी में पूंजी लगाना चाहते हैं और आप चाहते हैं कि आपकी प्रॉपर्टी को प्रोफेशनली मैनेज किया जाए, तो आप आज ही कांटेक्ट कीजिए उषा चंद्रा को। लैंडलाइन नंबर है 38654466 और मोबाइल नंबर है 0419775416। और आप प्रॉपर्टी की अधिक जानकारी और करंट अपडेट्स के लिए हमारी वेबसाइट पे लॉगिन कर सकते हैं। हमारी वेबसाइट है www.globenetreality.com.au। ग्लोबनेट रियलिटी आपका अपना लोकल रियल एस्टेट एजेंट है। हमारा पता है ग्लोबनेट रियलिटी, शॉप नंबर 5, 2281 सैंडगेट रोड, बुंदल, क्वींसलैंड। ग्लोबनेट रियलिटी, रियल एस्टेट इज अवर वर्ल्ड।
GlobeNet Realty is the world. Mandeep, a very good morning from Brisbane, Australia. I hope you enjoyed this show. Well, right now let's go to Victoria and look at the roadmap of Victoria. So Professor Tony Blanky, he's saying the easing of restrictions for Victorians in lockdown, especially in Melbourne, remains a way off and a lot of unknowns still remain in the play. Let's hear from Professor Tony.
Tony Blakely, thanks for being with us again.
Pleasure.
Let me ask you a big picture question about what's guiding the philosophy in Victoria. Most major nations seem to have ended up in a place where they're saying we have to have our societies functioning, we have to let people open their businesses, we have to let people see their families, we have to let kids go to school, and then with that as the base and using masks and social distancing, then we have to manage however many cases we get. Victoria seems to be saying we have to get cases to a certain low number and then we will reopen society to functioning. Why is that the approach?
That is the approach because we've struggled to keep the caseload under control without getting it down, and we're figuring that we need to bring it down before we open up. So we're trying to emulate, if you like, tight suppression done by South Korea, what's happened well in New South Wales, but we've got to get those numbers down. I think we could probably get them down not quite as far as is in the roadmap before we go from stage 3 to stage 2, which is the major transition.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because you can't obviously stop all movement in Melbourne because you have to have some essential services. So that means you're always going to have some cases in the community. What if we hit October the 26th and Victoria's been stuck for a while at around 15 cases a day and it's not going up or down, but you just cannot get to that 5 number? Then what would happen? Would the population stay locked up indefinitely?
Well, I can't answer that. I'm not the Premier, not the Chief Health Officer, but the way I would approach it as follows. I think that 5 per day, average per day is quite ambitious. And if you've got an outbreak and there's 10 people in one outbreak, well, that's kind of just a bit more than one person. So you've got to bring that expert knowledge to bear and be confident in your contact tracing and confident in your ability to squash down outbreaks and deal with them and move forward. So I think we can change those things a bit, and there are some policies that we can probably implement to help make that transition a bit sooner than October the 26th.
You raised contact tracing. That's come under quite a lot of commentary and criticism. How would you describe the performance of the Victorian system?
Again, I'm not on the inside, but from what I know is contact tracing now in Victoria is probably as good as New South Wales. It wasn't 2 or 3 months ago, but now it is. I suspect the marginal gains from contact tracing improving are diminishing. They're still there, and there may still be gains from a better app if we had one and with the testing times. But actually the bigger gains I think that might get us into stage 2 faster are around how we manage those small outbreaks and squashing them out really quickly. And also I'm introducing this idea today of smarter masking. We've done mass masking really well, but maybe we can do things like better fitting masks for people on trains and public transport and in office places because of that aerosol effect. And that would be I hypothesise that would give a nice marginal gain.
So do you have a number in mind that you think that should be set out instead of 5?
Yeah, so I have to declare an interest here. I provided with other people the modelling that informed this, and I think, at 10 cases per day on our model, you only have a 10% risk of a resurgence by Christmas. But I think we can even go higher than 10 because 10 is, in our model, is for sort of a population across the average. And if you allow for the fact you've got people in aged care, and aged care can pull those numbers down, healthcare, those outbreaks I was talking about before, I think we can do better and use expert judgment to perhaps release a little bit earlier. But that's a job for Brett Sutton, Alan Cheng.
as you say, you're not...
And that's the update there from Tony Blakey. And of course, don't forget that tomorrow from 10 a.m. I will bring the weekend special and we'll do a recap of everything that's happened in the week. And of course, tomorrow we will look at some of the resignations from the parliament. So who's in, who's out, and who's resigning, who's stepping aside, and why. What are some of the reasons behind that? Why is all that happening? So, there's some bit of a investigation that's been going on, and as we know, that has resulted in bit of reshuffling and remodeling, and what it's all going to be looking like. So, we'll analyze all that tomorrow. So, with lots more to talk about that as well. But today, before we finish off, there's, two segments that I really want to touch on before we go. There's so much that we can put on the show. One is I will look at the aged care, and the second one is we'll look at the retail sector and, of course, the bricks and mortar as well. But right now, first up, we'll go behind the scenes to look at the aged care. As we know, that aged care is always been a lot of concern from many people. So elderly Australians in nursing homes, as we have seen before, the mistreatments at many times, and of course there have been 500 deaths in aged care facilities, especially in Victoria. Let's take a look at this report by going behind the scenes in the Victorian aged care.
Welcome to another big day. Every day we remind ourselves that there is a face at the end of the work that we're doing here. We run at a pretty intense tempo on a daily basis. Most people, or all people, come in and it's pretty much a 12-hour day, and from the minute that they're briefed to the minute that they leave, everybody comes in and they roll up their sleeves.
On the 15th floor of a Melbourne office building, a team drawn from across the country is preparing for another day of managing a crisis in aged care.
Just looking at the map by geography, we've still got the heat map here, which you can see the lighter colour circles are the ones where the outbreaks are starting to come off. A quick look at the epidemic.
We've got about 65 people and 21 different agencies that are represented here. We've got specialists in here, we've got geriatricians, we've got infection disease specialists, we've got epidemiologists, we've got aged care specialists, Australian Defence Force.
Now in its 6th week, the Victorian Aged Care Response Centre was set up quickly in July as aged care outbreaks worsened to organise training, support and extra staff to aged care facilities across the state.
Part of my job with helping with manage the clinical waste and this huge exponential increase, 100 times, 200 times increase in clinical waste at some of these facilities. Did the truck turn up? Did it take your bins? Did they take enough bins? How much of this infectious waste are you actually making every day?
We've got about 43 facilities.
We've got 43 facilities on our list at the moment who we're providing support to.
The aim was to respond to this pandemic that came upon us rather quickly and escalated even further.
So there will be a transition plan at some stage. We're really here for the surge workforce during the current pandemic. And
we know that if a staff member in one of these facilities returns a positive COVID test, they're out of action. But the bigger impact is coming from their close contacts, where you can actually lose a team or a number of teams across it.
So that's that probe, and that's the response team there. And it is timely that, it's be looked into, because we know there have been so many reports of things happening in aged care. And unfortunately, the 500 deaths that have occurred in the, elderly in the aged care center. As we know, people have lived their whole life, contributed to the community, contributed to the society, contributed to the economy of this land. And when it's the golden years, when the last resting years, that should be, nice, and they should be able to spend their time in peace and in a loving environment, and not being treated the way sometimes they are treated. I'm not saying that each and every center is bad, but we have seen some cases before. There was some footage from some of the security camps, the CCTV footage, which shows the mistreatment of them in the aged treatment home. That is correct. Well, right now the last news for today is the bricks and mortar retail continue to lose revenue to online shoppers. As we know, everything these days is going online. News is going online. But by the way, Brisbane Indian Times is out, and you can pick up your copies from your favorite outlets. If you do have problems in getting your copy, please do contact us. And Pushpinder, nice to have you and your company there as well. And Kasinath, advocate, good to have you on the show there as well. Wonderful to see that you are all connecting. Well, bricks and mortar retail continue to lose revenue to online shoppers. So everything's happening online. You would have all lately received a notification from Australia Mail that the mail will now be delivered on every second day rather than every day. Of course, why? That is to accommodate the number of deliveries that they have to do of parcels, because with online shopping, the parcel delivery area has become great. And some of the big buildings have now installed the parcel receiving and distribution centers like Locus. So you get a notification in your letterbox, you go and punch in the code and you collect your parcel. You don't have to wait for the postie to come and sign off, because many people are at work when the posties do turn up with those parcels. So, let's take a look at how the traditional shops are now facing big challenge from the online shoppers.
Online shopping has been turbocharged by COVID-19, with Australia Post doubling delivery since August last year. Retailers, though, were already struggling to lift declining sales prior to the pandemic, all the more apparent in Myer's full-year results. The iconic department store is reporting a full-year loss of $172 million. It's a big drop from last year's profit of nearly $25 million. The COVID-19 lockdowns are having a big impact on in-store sales, down nearly 16% in the period, while online sales have nearly doubled since January. No help for shareholders, though, who won't get a dividend. The acceleration to online that COVID has brought is prompting many retailers to reconsider their physical footprint and call for a better deal on rent for the properties they plan to hold on to. But as Rachel Papazzoni found out, they could have a battle on their hands.
A battle on their hand they have, yes. So online is the way, and online is how things will happen. And of course, we know a lot of functions and events are taking place online as well. Let's take a very quick look at all the functions and events taking place. For all the functions and events, please log on to our website, and if you have subscribed to our EDM, every Friday you will get a notification of all the functions and events that are taking place in the weekend, so that you are up to date of what's happening. Remember that at this point in time, a lot is happening virtually, and of course online is the way to go at this point in time. And as I mentioned before, the latest issue of Brisbane Indian Times is out. You can go to your nearest outlet and pick up your copy of the hard copy. And if you have any problems getting any of the hard copies, please do contact our office and we will guide you to the nearest outlet center, as we have maintained print as well as the online version of the newspaper. And don't forget that tomorrow will be the weekend edition with the wrap-up, and of course the analysis of some of the political scene as to what's happening around, Of course, we have a looming election. And of course, there's been the battle of the borders as we know. And we'll also look at the number of cases that's been happening. Ladies and gentlemen, with that I need to say goodbye until tomorrow, but we will see you tomorrow with the weekend edition and the roundup for the week. It's been wonderful having your company on this very windy Friday. So, if you have things out on the deck, make sure they are secured, because it is very, very strong winds out there today. So until tomorrow, it's goodbye from me. Till then, stay safe.